Hello, everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Prof. Jeffrey Sachs Fan World. And here is today's content. When I examine the decision-making dynamics inside modern American politics, I am repeatedly struck by one simple truth: power today is more fragile than it appears. From the outside, it may seem as if a president moves through the world with unshakable authority, but from my vantage point, after decades studying political systems, I see something far more precarious. Power in our hyperpolarized era rests on perception, not on institutional strength. And perception can collapse in a matter of hours. This is exactly the environment in which Donald Trump faced what I would call the specter of an embarrassing political failure concerning the Epstein file. Whether one views Trump sympathetically or critically is irrelevant to the analytical point. A looming failure in such a high-profile, high-sensitivity context strikes at the very core of his political identity, the promise of dominance, control, and narrative mastery. In this landscape, credibility does not erode gradually. It shatters. Once the public senses hesitation or miscalculation, the cost is immediate and compounded. I have long compared political capital to financial capital. When trust weakens, it triggers something similar to a market run. Actors rush to distance themselves. Opponents sense vulnerability, and even allies begin quietly calculating alternatives. This logic applies no differently to presidents, including Trump. For Trump in particular, the threat was not only administrative, but deeply symbolic. His appeal has always rested on projecting certainty and strength positions that leave little room for visible retreat. The Epstein file, with its intersections of power, secrecy, and elite networks, represented the kind of political minefield where one misstep could dominate news cycles, fracture coalitions, and invite both domestic and global scrutiny. From my perspective, the greater risk was not the content itself, but the optics surrounding it. Any hint of a mishandled disclosure, delayed release, or contradictory messaging would have given critics a powerful narrative that Trump had lost control of a matter he could not afford to mishandle. In Washington, narratives accelerate rapidly. Perception becomes reality long before facts can catch up. This is why the embarrassing failure was so politically potent. It was not merely a bureaucratic stumble waiting to happen. It was a direct strike at Trump's foundational brand image. And once that image falters, the political economy surrounding a leader behaves like a destabilized market, unpredictable, emotional, and often unforgiving. In analyzing this, I see a broader structural problem. When political systems substitute institutional resilience with personality-driven governance, the entire system becomes susceptible to emotional decision-making. Decisions driven by fear of embarrassment are not signs of strategic governance. They are symptoms of a deeper vulnerability within the political order itself. When I approach the Epstein case, I do not view it merely as a scandal of personal misconduct or criminal networks. I see it as a window into something far more fundamental: the architecture of elite power in the United States and the lengths to which that architecture will go to protect itself. This is why the political handling of the Epstein files has always been fraught. It touches the most sensitive layers of American and transatlantic elite networks layers, where finance, intelligence, technology, and political influence intersect. And in such spaces, transparency is rarely welcomed. From my decades of studying global political economies, I've learned an uncomfortable truth: when secrecy becomes intertwined with elite survival, pressure is not applied through public channels, but through private, coordinated, and often invisible mechanisms. That is precisely the environment Trump found himself navigating. The pressure didn't come from the public or even from political rivals. It came from the elite ecosystem surrounding the file: major donors, legacy, political families, intelligence intermediaries, corporate boards with exposure, foreign actors quietly monitoring the fallout. To understand Trump's reversal, we must understand the incentives at play. The Epstein file carries a unique danger. It is not partisan, it is systemic. It does not target Republicans or Democrats. It threatens the network that spans them both. That makes it one of the few issues capable of generating rare bipartisan silent coordination. In my view, Trump was confronted with a form of soft coercion, subtle yet overwhelming. I call this phenomenon elite mutual deterrence. It occurs when powerful figures recognize that the downfall of one member of the network risks implicating the entire network. So instead of confronting the problem openly, elites collectively mobilize to contain it. This is the environment in which Trump had to calculate his moves. From the outside, it may seem as if Trump changed his mind, but from my analysis, the more accurate explanation is that he encountered the limits of presidential autonomy when confronting entrenched elite interests. American presidents possess formal power, yes, but informal power, the shadow system of influence, access, and leverage, often supersedes the formal. And the Epstein case sits squarely in the informal realm. I do not suggest that Trump feared personal implication. Rather, he feared the political consequences of crossing an elite boundary that few leaders dare to touch. When a political actor threatens to expose not a rival, but a system, that actor quickly learns the system's capacity to defend itself. I've observed these patterns in collapsing states, emerging economies, and in Western democracies alike. The logic is always the same. Institutions bend when elite cohesion is threatened. Trump's recalibration then was not a moment of weakness, but a moment of strategic recognition. He understood, perhaps reluctantly, that pressing forward risked igniting a cascade. He could not control market panic, diplomatic tremors, elite fragmentation, intelligence blowback, and political isolation. This is why the potential embarrassing failure mattered so much. It was not about one decision. It was about provoking a system with the capacity to retaliate. Ultimately, Trump's reversal reflects a larger truth. I have argued for many years the United States is governed not solely by democratic institutions, but by networks of unelected influence that exert extraordinary pressure on policymaking. The Epstein file merely exposed the fault line. When I examine the sudden reversal on the Epstein files, I cannot treat it as an isolated legal maneuver. I see it as a direct reflection of how power behaves under pressure. In global affairs, as in domestic politics, truth is rarely suppressed because it is trivial. It is suppressed because it threatens entrenched interests. And in this case, the specter of an embarrassing political defeat created the one condition in which even a figure as resistant to transparency as Trump was forced to reassess his position. From my vantage point as an analyst of global political economy, I interpret his reversal as a textbook illustration of what happens when political legitimacy erodes faster than the machinery of control can compensate. When a leader senses the approaching possibility of humiliation, not merely defeat, but public disgrace, his strategic calculus shifts dramatically. The fear is not ideological, not moral, but reputational. And reputational damage at the highest levels of power ricochets through every domain: diplomacy, donor networks, elite alliances, and public narratives. I have seen versions of this dynamic in many countries: Russia, Italy, Brazil, the United Kingdom. A political actor cornered by accumulating scandals tries to contain the fallout by tightening control. But when a scandal intersects with broader structural vulnerabilities, economic stagnation, elite fragmentation, or electoral uncertainty, the strategy collapses. The attempt to bury information becomes more politically costly than releasing it. That is precisely what I observe here. Trump reversed course not because the moral weight of the Epstein case suddenly dawned on him, but because the political cost of secrecy overtook the political cost of disclosure. The threat of appearing complicit, evasive, or desperate in the face of public pressure became greater than the threat posed by transparency itself. This tells us something essential about American politics today. Our institutions are so fractured, our elite coalitions so unstable, that even a former president cannot tightly control the narrative when the public senses a deeper truth lurking beneath layers of secrecy. In that environment, even the strongest political actors must occasionally yield not to justice per se, but to the pressures generated by an anxious public and a fragmented ruling class. In my analysis, the reversal symbolizes a broader geopolitical vulnerability. When a major world power's political system begins to lose coherence, its credibility abroad declines as well. Allies question its reliability. Adversaries exploit its inconsistencies. Transparency, forced or voluntary, becomes a geopolitical event. Thus, Trump's reversal is not merely a reaction to domestic risk. It is a reflection of a weakening political center in a superpower that increasingly struggles to reconcile its democratic ideals with its internal fractures. When I analyze the economic dimensions of Trump's reversal on the Epstein files, I must begin with a principle I've repeated for decades. Political scandals rarely remain confined to political spaces. They spill into markets, donor networks, corporate alliances, and the informal circles through which the American elite manage both wealth and influence. The Epstein case is particularly destabilizing because it sits at the intersection of money privilege, private access, and geopolitical leverage. From my perspective, Trump's initial resistance to releasing the files was motivated not only by political calculation, but by a deep awareness that the documents could implicate individuals who form part of the implicit economic scaffolding of American power. In the United States, political campaigns depend on dense webs of financiers, private equity figures, media magnates, energy interests, and real estate empires. These networks may be fragmented, but they share one unspoken rule: avoid anything that exposes the inner workings of elite privilege. The threat of embarrassment was not Trump's alone. It extended into the broader ecosystem that sustains American political life. And when I say ecosystem, I'm referring to the informal, semi-visible structure that determines who gets access, who receives funding, and who is invited into the rooms where national strategy is quietly shaped. This is why the reversal matters economically. By releasing the files, even reluctantly, Trump signaled that he was willing to disturb the equilibrium of this elite infrastructure when pushed to the edge. That is not a small gesture. It introduces distrust among donors. It destabilizes alliances. It shakes the confidence of the very individuals who bankroll political movements, influence policy formulation, and maintain international business channels. In my experience working with governments around the world, when elite networks sense exposure, two reactions follow. One, a rapid withdrawal of financial support as donors seek distance from volatility. Two, an internal reconfiguration as powerful actors attempt to insulate themselves from potential blowback. Markets, too, react to shifts in political legitimacy, even when the trigger is scandal rather than policy. Investors, especially global capital, value predictability. They may tolerate authoritarian tendencies, but they do not tolerate systemic uncertainty. The mere possibility that high-level scandal could implicate influential financiers introduces volatility into investment sentiment. Both phenomena are visible here, and because the United States anchors global confidence, even a symbolic tremor in its political core reverberates across continents. Thus, the economic significance of Trump's reversal is twofold. It accelerates the fragmentation of U.S. elite cohesion, and it signals to the world that American political power is increasingly reactive rather than strategic. Neither is a trivial development. Both weaken the geopolitical credibility of a country already struggling to maintain moral authority. What we see is not just a scandal, but a structural fracture, an erosion of the tacit arrangements that hold together America's economic political elite. And once that cohesion begins to dissolve, restoring it becomes extraordinarily difficult. As I reflect on the Epstein reversal and its political reverberations, I find myself returning to a deeper question, one that transcends the personalities involved. What does this moment reveal about the moral condition of American democracy? For me, this case is not merely about Donald Trump, his advisors, or the political consequences of mishandling a toxic scandal. It is at its core a mirror reflecting the erosion of ethical foundations in American public life. I have long argued that the crisis of American governance is not primarily institutional but philosophical. We suffer from a withering of civic virtue and abandonment of the republic's moral architecture in exchange for short-term political advantage. The Epstein affair and the desperate political calculus around it is simply a vivid reminder of this deeper malaise. When a political leader's decision-making can be warped by the fear of humiliation, the instinct for self-preservation overtakes the obligation to serve the truth. This is not a personal flaw alone. It is a systemic one. In the United States today, political actors operate within an incentive structure that punishes transparency and rewards manipulation. An electorate polarized to the point of tribal reflex makes moral clarity less politically valuable than tactical ambiguity. Media ecosystems tuned to sensationalism and outrage magnify scandal but mute nuanced reflection. And somewhere within this frenzied cycle, the moral center of governance collapses. What troubles me most is not that Trump reversed course on a controversial issue. I have seen political reversals throughout my career, but that such reversals now occur without reference to public ethics. The reasoning is rarely grounded in constitutional duty, humanitarian responsibility, or societal welfare. Instead, political strategy has become a kind of moral vacuum where the only measurable currency is humiliation avoided or dominance preserved. When leaders act not from principle, but from the fear of losing face, we enter a dangerous terrain. Democracy becomes performative rather than substantive. The Epstein issue also exposed a secondary philosophical dilemma, our culture's uneasy relationship with accountability. American political culture often oscillates between voyeuristic outrage and total amnesia. We demand justice, but only in episodic surges. We call for transparency, but only when it is politically convenient. This creates a landscape where scandals function less as catalysts for reform and more as weapons in partisan warfare. I believe that a healthy democracy must be anchored in a stable moral orientation, one that encourages leaders to act not according to the fear of disgrace, but according to the duty to the public good. Yet the Epstein reversal illustrates precisely the opposite decisions shaped by optics, vulnerability, and tactical retreat, rather than by ethical responsibility. In that sense, the episode is not an anomaly, but a symptom of a broader philosophical disorder, the displacement of virtue by spectacle. From a moral political perspective, the United States must reclaim the foundational principles that once distinguished Republican governance. That means elevating truth above expedience, accountability, above image management and transparency, above partisan manipulation. A democracy cannot sustain itself when its leaders are perpetually calculating embarrassment rather than embodying integrity. nor can it thrive when its citizens consume politics as entertainment rather than as the collective stewardship of the common good. As I see it, the path forward requires a cultural reorientation, a reassertion of the values that bind a democratic society together. We must rediscover the moral seriousness that political leadership demands. We must cultivate a civic culture capable of rewarding honesty even when it is uncomfortable and punishing deception even when it benefits our preferred political faction. The Epstein episode, its scandal, its political fallout, and the panic it induced offers the United States a moment of philosophical introspection. Will the country continue down a path where governance is hollowed out by fear, spectacle, and moral evasiveness, or can it use this moment to reaffirm the ethical principles essential to democratic life? For my part, I remain convinced that renewal is possible. America has stumbled before it can regain its footing, but only if it recognizes that the deepest threats to its democracy are not external adversaries or political rivals. They are the internal moral failures that corrode the republic from within. In essence, the Epstein case and Trump's sudden reversal tell us far more about the condition of American politics than about the scandal itself. At its core, this episode reveals three fundamental truths. First, Trump's decision-making was driven not by legal principle or moral consideration, but by political self-preservation. The fear of a humiliating political defeat, one that could damage his standing with voters and elites, forced him to pull back abruptly. This shows how fragile the internal logic of U.S. political power has become when even a former president operates from vulnerability rather than confidence. Second, the episode exposes the deeper structural weakness of American democracy, a system where optics outweigh ethics, where leaders respond to the threat of shame more than to the demands of truth. The Epstein controversy became a battlefield of perception, not accountability. Third, the broader philosophical lesson is unmistakable. American politics is trapped in a cycle where scandal replaces substance, where public morality is overshadowed by partisan spectacle. This is not about Trump alone. It is a revealing symptom of a democracy losing its moral center. Ultimately, the Epstein affair forces us to confront a sobering reality. The true danger to American governance is not a single scandal, but the growing inability of leaders to act from principle rather than fear.